So now that I have a handle on the basic workflow in Unity, I'm going to push forward and start to establish Project 2. So the first project we worked on was just really kind of an experiment to understand the workflow inside Unity and understand how to create a landscape and a first-person controller. This time we're going to take what we know and we're going to push a little bit further, and we're going to set up a very specific scenario. Now at this point you should have spent some additional time refining your island concept. I've posted my sketch that I'm going to reference here. Now this is a living document that's going to continue to evolve while I'm working on the project. So I don't feel like I'm done with this project. Excuse me. However, this will give me an idea of where to get started. It'll give me the basic information I need for the overall shape of the island and some of the details that are in it and some of the direction of the paths that I want to take or force the user to take. So in order to get this project rolling, I want to point out that I've created a class folder, and inside that class folder I'm going to create all the projects and save all the assets for this class. So I'm going to jump into Unity and I'll choose to create a new project, and I'll set the location of that project into my class folder. So I'm keeping mine in Dropbox. I have a game design folder, and inside game design I have VCIM 1200. So once I choose that location, what I need to do is just come up with a name for my project, and I'll just simply call this the island. And I'll hit save. Now when I do that, it establishes the location. Once I choose all the packages that I want to import and use from the beginning, Unity will go through the process of creating that project folder for me. Now when it comes to all the packages, we're just going to select most of the packages with the exception of those that reference mobile. We don't need mobile packages for this project, and we also can avoid any of the DirectX 11 shaders. So I'll just avoid that as well. I have some additional elements, packages that I've downloaded from the Unity store. I'm going to skip those, but I did download the Train Assets Unity package as well, and I'll show you how you can access that. So I'll skip a couple of these other elements that you may not have, and I'll create the project. Now it'll take a few minutes for the project to be created. Once Unity's done creating that project, it takes me to the default interface. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the desktop just to hide Unity just for a moment and remind you that I created a project in Unity called the Island. Unity built the project folder for me and established all the assets that I need. Now inside the Assets folder, inside my project folder, inside my assets folder, this is the same location that the project tab looks at inside Unity. So if I go back to Unity and I'm looking inside my project tab, I can see that I have assets, and from assets I have standard assets. Let me just move this over a little bit. And terrain assets. Those are the same things that I can see through my system finder. So when I'm managing content inside Unity, if I'm bringing content from an outside application, I have two choices. I can copy that content into my asset folder, keeping it organized with appropriate subfolders as needed, or I can drag it directly into the Unity project tab. Now that's the method that I'm gonna take here. Now to get this project started, as I mentioned, I pushed my map concept a little bit further, so I got a clear idea of what the basic flow around the island is, what the topology is, and I've just marked some points of interest, and that might be a fork in the road, or I might have to make a decision. But these are concepts that I'm going to continue to work out, but I've established the basic notion of this island. Now, we have to strike that balance of understanding what our capabilities are inside Unity and what we can pull off. So this island sketch will be a living document, and as I come up with new ideas based on what I learn and understand inside Unity, I might integrate some of those concepts back into this map. So again, over the course of this project, this map and your map should continue to evolve. So I'm going to jump back into Unity, and to get this project started, what I'll do is I'm going to go to Game Objects, Create Other, and I'm going to start by establishing the terrain. Now I'll just double click on the terrain to zoom out, and I can zoom in and zoom out with the mouse wheel at this point. And if I hold down the Option key and click and drag, I can orbit around. If I hold Option Command, I can pan. So I'm zooming in and out with the mouse wheel. I'm Option dragging and Option and Command dragging to pan. So I want to orbit around, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my orientation just a little bit. And the way that I'm choosing to reorient the space is I want to kind of be looking down the Z axis or the blue axis and let the red axis run left and right. And so the idea here is that the green axis is up and down, which is pretty typical of most applications. The x-axis is left and right, which is typical of a 2D application. Then I'm looking in the foreground background along the z-axis. So if I flatten this out, I can think of this as kind of a top-down view of my map. Now, with that terrain object selected, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the terrain script component here and all the tools that are nested in it. Now, the tool all the way over to the right, this little cog here, this is the settings for my terrain, and I want to select that. And the first thing I want to do is I want to reduce the resolution or the size of my terrain, because right now this is set to 2,000 meters square with a 600 meter height. Now, that might seem kind of like an abstract notion measuring in meters, but rest assured that a 2,000 meter map is very large, and it would take us a long time if we're walking around to start from here and work all the way around the map. So I want to reduce the size of this. And what I'll do is I'll take the width down, and maybe I'll make this just 1,000 meters. So I'll start off with half of what I wanted. And then the length, maybe I'll take this down to about 800. So you can see that that terrain got much smaller, and it might still seem like a pretty abstract concept because we don't have any reference. So I don't have a real clear sense of what the size of this terrain is. And just for a point of reference, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another game object. And the game object I'm going to create is a cube. And that cube I created, I don't even see it. So I'll double click on it, and I can see that it's way down there. In fact, it looks like it's underneath my terrain object, and it's just kind of this little speck. Well, I'm going to select the terrain object, and I see that my position is at 0, 0, 0. So if I look in the transform position, I can see that that's kind of in the center of this 3D space. And if I grab that cube object for one reason or another, this cube object was created in a position of, roughly 500 along the X, negative 200 along the Y, and 400 and some change along the Z. What I'll do is I'll click on this little cog and tell it to reset. That'll set it at 0, 0, 0. I still don't see it. And I'll just double click to zoom in. There it is. Okay, so this little cube, the reason I made this little cube is because this little cube, let me just see if I can continue to back out. That little cube right there has a scale of 1 along the X, 1 along the Y, and 1 along the Z. So this cube is 1 meter cubed. And 1 meter, we can think of this as roughly, we don't want to, get into too precise of a translation, but, we can think of 1 meter as roughly 3 feet. Okay, so a person, an average person, would be, about 2 meters tall, So we could think of this cube as about half a person. And so if I were to bump up the Y value to 2 of the cube, just to zoom in, oops, I bumped up the collider, not the box itself. So I'll bump that up to 2. This cube is now the size of a person. And so we get at least, it's still pretty abstract, but we get a sense of how big this cube is relative to the rest of the map. Okay, so that's about the size of a person. This is the environment we have to play with. And I think I'm, fairly satisfied with that for now in terms of selecting my terrain, going into the terrain settings, and setting this resolution. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this terrain establishing it because I may have to trash it and throw it away and start over again. Because maybe I made some decisions about the width and the length that just are inappropriate, but I'll find out really quickly when I throw my first-person camera into the scene. So I'm going to jump back into the Finder, and rather than going back and forth to the web browser, I'm just going to go into my map project folder, and I'll double-click on my map JPEG. That'll open up in preview, and I'll leave that sort of tucked down in the corner here so I get a sense of what the size of this is. And I'll jump back into Unity, and very quickly I'll just grab the raise and lower terrain height tool, and I'll leave the soft brush. I'm going to make the brush size as large as I can make it for now. I'll leave the opacity where it's at, and I'll just rough out the real quick shape, the outline of the island. So I'm going to use as much of that map as I can. Okay, and that's probably the rough shape of my island. Now I get the feeling that I pushed that up way too high. So my opacity was probably too high. And this is where the paint height tool comes in. So we have the raise tool and we have the paint height. And remember, the big difference here is that we can set that maximum height for the tool. So I'll just take this back, and even for the sake of this part of of just establishing the basic shape of the map, I'll just set that to 1 meter. And so now when I come in and I paint this, I'm painting that map just 1 meter above what will ultimately be sea level. Okay, so just like we did in the previous project, I'm roughing out the basic shape of my map, and of course I'll come back in and continue to refine this based on the shape that I need. Okay, but there's basically the positive shape that I need. Now, it's always helpful to provide a little bit of contrast here to get the water into the scene, and also apply a basic texture to this. So I'll just jump over to the paintbrush tool, the paint texture tool. With the paint texture tool selected, I'm going to edit the texture because I have no textures here. I want to add texture, and in the texture field, the one to the left, I'm going to select a texture. I'm going to start off with a real basic, I'll use this good dirt, and I'll double click it, and I'll say add. So now that inherits the good dirt texture. And the next thing that I want to do is go into my standard assets, and I'll click and reveal that hierarchy, and I'll go into water basic. And inside my water basic folder, with it selected, I'll just grab this daylight simple water, and I'll drop that inside the scene. Now I'm going to take this position, and I'm going to reset the position, and all that does is take the position down to 0, 0, 0, which is the same position that my terrain is at. So it's actually at the same exact location as the terrain. And so when I have two surfaces that are running parallel to each other, I'm going to get some really strange artifacts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump it up on the Y value by 0.5. I'm going to make the X and the Z scale very large. So I know my map is about 1,000 meters wide. So I'll make this about 2,000 meters by 2,000 meters. There we go. And I can move that around, but there we go. There's the basic shape of my island. Now obviously I got a little bit of a glitch. I don't have all the nuance that I have in my reference sketch, but now that I have the contrast here, I can grab the terrain tool, and I'll just go back in with either the raise and lower terrain tool or the paint height tool. In this case, I'll use the raise and lower. And remember that trick that if you hold down the shift key, you can paint down, so you push it down. So I'm just going to reduce the size of my brush quite a bit, and now I'll go back in and continue to refine that shape. So I can clean up the edges, and by holding down the shift key, I'm pushing everything back under the water. Okay? If I want to be a little bit more precise about this, again, I can go to that paint height tool. That's set to 1, and that'll allow me to go in here and really kind of smooth out some of these mountains that I inadvertently introduced. There we go. So I'll just jump back and forth between these two tools to get that basic shape that I want. And I do have, you know, kind of this lagoon. If I go back to my map here, I have this bay in here, and over here is going to be my volcano. This tapers to a much sharper point. There's a little bit more nuance here in the shape. But more importantly, there's this kind of lagoon that goes back into this island here with a couple of rivers that run off it. So I'll just rough out that space really quickly. I'll make that brush much smaller, and I'll just quickly get in here and kind of rough that in. Now again, those are way off compared to what my sketch is, but I'll take some time and I'll really get in here and start to refine it. And you can really start to see how, you know, you can leave some of these land masses kind of poking out and jagged, and, you know, add some little sandbars and some islands. And just with playing with this for a little bit, I can really quickly kind of get at that basic shape that I need. Now, once I get the really rough shape, before I spend too much time on this, first thing I want to do is I want to save my progress. So I'm going to go back to my assets folder. I'm going to do a quick file, save scene as, or I could simply save scene. I haven't established my scene yet, and I'll just call this Island01. So it's the island scene, and it's the first instance of that, and then I'll hit save. And now I have an island scene project. This project, we probably won't use multiple levels until, you know, unless at some point we're going to have a menu screen. That will be a separate level. But in terms of the gameplay or the environment of the experience, we're just going to stick with a one level game. We'll use some other levels to, you know, have an end screen and a beginning screen. But other than that, our primary gameplay is just going to be on one level. So with that, I'm going to continue to refine this. But before I spend too much time, I want to get in and walk around on this island to make sure that the size and the scale is what I hope it would be. But I'll do that in the next presentation.